Moving on to our regular agenda. If there are no objections, we've had a request to move number 2 to number 1 because we have some babies in the room. So if we could please, if there are no objections, that's what I'm going to read off as our number 1. Okay. Consideration and possible action to approve a variance to the subdivision ordinance, section 62-3E, 1E, section 62-41B, 13, section 62-41B, 17, section 6241B, 19, 6241, 25, 6241B, 28, section 6210411, section 62-108, A8, and section 62-115 for 9.86 acres of property located at 6202 Bissell Road, and authorize the mayor to execute the development agreement. Quasi?
Yeah, good evening, Mayor Davidson, councillors. I'm Kwasi, representing the Planning Division and Development Services to present the staff analysis and our findings of fact of the applicant's request of this subdivision variance. The subject property, as you all know, just with an access to Bissell Road, as you see on the map out there. Whilst doing this work, we actually contacted the Gulf Coast Water Authority, to have discussions with them on their position on this particular application. They made us aware that they do not want an asphalt or concrete surface or the access easement crossing the canal. Also, they will not allow a widening of the access to 60 feet. And since the Gulf Coast Water Authority will not allow an asphalt or concrete surface or a minimum right-of-way, it made it impossible for the owner to construct a road to the 6202 Bissell Road to comply with the subdivision ordinance. This is just an intro up of our discussions with them. We went ahead looking at the site, look at the subject property, the entrance to the property, and also look at the access to the property from the Gulf Coast Water Authority bridge over the canal. You notice, as I've said earlier, that the owner intends to build only a new residence, but there's a requirement from the planning principles and the requirement to plat the property in order to obtain a building permit for a new residence on the property, since the property's legal description of land is already by meets and bounds. Access to the property from the Gulf Coast Water is this bridge over as shown in the map here. The construction of a single family structure requires approval of a plat and the compliance with the city's subdivision ordinance. However, we notice in our discussions, in our review, that this is a very peculiar and an unusual situation, in the sense that due to the past actions by previous owners and the easements that have been created over the canal. And so it required us to look at the requirements in the ordinance, the rights of the property owner, and the interests of the community at large. This is where our review will be heading to in these three areas. As such, the applicant requested to forego the requirements of Chapter 62 of the ordinance. There are 9 subdivision variances that he requested to forego, all of them, to be able to construct the property. We look at each and every one and then see how applicable it is, to the ordinance, to the interests of the property owner, to the requirements of the Gulf Coast Water Authority, and then to the community at large, as a way of maybe promoting order, safety, convenience, and beauty in the environment. That is where we come in. When we look at section 1, in which he really requested that, if you look at section 62-3E, 1E, that it states that if the subject property is greater than 5 acres and has access to a public street as identified in the design criteria manual, then as per the latter, a public improvement is required. We look at it carefully and we said this particular one, it does not really qualify for platting exception because it does not have an access to a road. It does not have an access to a road. And the property access on Bissell Road from the access easement is rather over the canal. That was the first item that was requested. The next item that we look at was section 6241B13, in which the applicant requested that the exact layout should include streets, street names, length of the arcs, bearings, and so many others. And we look at it carefully, and we notice that without the Gulf Coast Water Authority's consent, the property owner cannot really abide by this section. So, in a way, we approve the particular for the property owner. We looked again at another request that was made, which was the original certificate obtained from the appropriate county taxing authority. We noticed that the applicant has already paid taxes and the tax certificate has been provided, and it does not really require variance in this session as such. We continue to look at the third one, in which I was requesting for a certificate of approval on the face of the plat with signature of the Planning Commission. Additionally, a certificate of approval signed by the Donate District. And we noticed that the approval of the preliminary plat by the Planning and Zoning Commission will be approved, and the determination that the subdivision conforms to the subdivision regulations of the city, and that it had been approved for recordation in the county. We continued, to look at the fourth analysis, in which there was a request for construction drawings, which he wanted to vary. And we noticed that a variance in this section does not really apply, and we need to approve what he really wanted. As a continuation, there was also a request that in the event that the tract of land being subdivided is adjacent to a street or a road that does not meet the design criteria manual specifications, the subdivider shall be required to improve all side streets and roads and others. And we notice, continue, that the tract of land being subdivided is not adjacent to a street or road. And without the Gulf Coast Water Authority's consent, this particular property owner cannot abide by this section of requirement. So we went ahead and approved that. As a continuation, there was another one on the rights of way width, which he wanted to vary. We notice again that the Gulf Coast Water Authority is also opposed to widening the crossing to 60 feet in width. So the right of way may be detected. But again, without the Gulf Coast Water Authority's consent and others, we cannot, so we agreed with the property owner, to vary this particular section. As a continuance, there was also the same in 62-108, that any subdivision land shall provide each lot of access to a public street or specified in the design criteria manual. We notice again, as said earlier, that the tract of land being subdivided is not without adjacent to any street. And without the Gulf Coast Water Authority's consent, the property owner cannot abide by the subdivision. So we agreed for him to vary this request. Again, There was one in terms of the 62-115, in which the subdividers shall furnish and install all necessary drainage improvement in the City of Manvel Design Criteria Manual. The appropriate drainage district criteria and also the subdivider must provide for the maintenance of all improvements, and so on and so forth. In reality, staff notice a variance is not required to this session, and it does not really apply. However, we note that the property is located in the floodplain and will require an elevation that may trigger a drainage plan with the submitter of a field depth application. And a drainage plan is not really required with the plat, but it may be in the course of time, to look at the floodplain issues that may come up. And we tend to really agree with the property owner to vary this particular requirement at this stage. In conclusion, we notice that the existing situation regarding the 120-foot irrigation easement and the 30-foot access easement with the bridge maintenance and construction creates a lot of inconsistencies between the variance requests, the subdivision ordinance, and the design criteria manual, because we are in a very peculiar and unusual situation. Again, we notice that due to the irrigation easement and the bridge access easement to the property, there are special circumstances or conditions necessitating a relief, from the requirements in the subdivision ordinance to the design criteria manual. And we agreed with the applicant in this session that the need to vary from these requirements. Again, we notice there's a real hardship expressed, self-imposed by the previous owners since 1941. That has been jointly imposed and created by past and present the subject property owner, and also imposed by the Gulf Coast Water Authority, then formerly the Briscoe Irrigation Company on the subject property. And this created that conflict in which we try to walk a thin line to make sure that we are, in a way, able to promote a safe and orderly development in the city, and at the same time, look at the existing situation and respect the rights and interests of the property owner as such. We continued that, in a way, platting is required when a landowner is developing a property to subdivide into parcels while creating a subdivision, which is a standard platting process, because platting is an important step in the development process. And also it provides for the orderly, safe, and beautiful development of the city within the city limits. And in a way, we determined that if there are other natural and man-made conditions peculiar to a site, just as this, it creates a departure from the requirements without destroying the ordinance meaning, its standards and regulations, and the implementation of planning policies. So what we went further is to note that the platting ensures the owner doesn't trespass on another property, and land for public use remains public, and laws comply with zoning rules and restrictions, and all property owners have access to utilities. And platting also controls the growth of cities from our planning principles as such. So our recommendation for staff, and from our analysis for your decision as councillors, is that we recommend approval and side with the applicant on all these sessions, about 8 of them, of the subdivision ordinance. There were 9 requests. We agree with the property owner on 8 of them. And that they pose too much restrictions that we had to agree for him to forgo and just vary the conditions and not to go by the book as it is in a way. So we recommend approval of these 8 conditions as such. And these conditions is that there's still a need for a form of platting and that the subdivision order will expire upon the change of use from single-family residential, or the subdivision ordinance relief will expire if the property is platted into more than one lot or so to be replatted. And but on the first one, we recommend a denial because he was asking for an exception to platting. And because it's not actually that request is only when you are about a public road, which he is not. So we recommend that one out of the 9 requests to vary, we approve 8, and then the one that at least to a form of platting, to promote an orderly development within the area. So if you look at them carefully, excuse me. So this is what we have here, and all the requests that the applicant brought, to vary the subdivision or ordinance. Yeah, so that's all that I have. Yeah, now I thought I had another one. So, yeah. So thank you for your time, and
Thank you for your presentation. We appreciate that. Jason?
Does the applicant have any objection to meeting your requirements?
I had discussions with the engineer. I mean, it was just more communication in terms of I requested a lot of information. They give us a lot of all the information on the easements and others, and I haven't communicated with the applicant since then.
Certainly.
Are you outstanding? Move to approve as recommended.
I second.
Really?
You may.
Woo.
This is real quick. One point of clarification that I haven't, thank you for the presentation, was that within the variance report, Exhibit 5 is a plat that they had previously submitted. Is that agreeable by staff that plat meets all the standards, or will you guys be now going back with the property owners and talking with them about possibly some adjustments that might be needed for the plat they did submit?
Yeah, I'll discuss with my director, and then I think we'll go back and look at it and then see which areas has to be done and others.
Jessica?
I can answer that for you. The one that reviewed the plat. The big hangups on this was the road and the fact that Bissell didn't connect and access was via easement. So with these variances that are granted, it paves the way that we can move forward with platting on the property. So I don't foresee any issues because that was the largest hurdle that was there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Kyle?
The one thing that I do want to point out is this is the downside of subdividing by meets and bounds. Even if it was done in the past, this is what can happen. You can create a landlocked piece of property just simply because somebody goes out and sort of does it by meets and bounds. This is the advantage of doing it by platting and by the subdivision ordinance requirements. You don't run into these kinds of things where you need 8 or 9 different variances to the city's own development regulations. So just a word of caution in the future.
Okay. We have a motion, and we have a second. So, all of those,
To approve.
The recommendation, and I guess you'd have to ask what the actual motion was to deny the
Approve as recommended and conditioned.
yes, with one denial of
I didn't hear
request
that
for a
as
variance for the
condition,
platting,
yes.
and then approval of all the rest of them.
all right. So I apologize for my stutter there.
No worries.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. Hope we got close to bedtime. All right. We'll go back with number 1, consideration and possible action to approve the road, thank you, Quasi, I'm sorry. To approve the road and bridge interlocal agreement FY 2022 between Brazoria County and the city of Manvel. Kyle?
Mayor and council members, this is actually the same interlocal agreement that the council has approved every year. In December, we provide a requested list of assistance to the county. This is a follow-up that the county asks the council to approve in January based on the interlocal agreement that we've done in the past. So the 4 roads that we had submitted were Cemetery, Crest Ridge, Alabama, and Georgia. And again, this is the interlocal agreement that we would request that the council consider approving so that we can send it to the county and ask them to help us on these 4 roads.
All right.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All those in favor? And the motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. Number 3, consideration and possible action to approve a variance to the subdivision ordinance, section 62-111, additional street requirements for property located at 6336 Del Bello Spur, and authorize the mayor to execute the development agreement.
Jessica's going to take care of this.
Jessica.
Hello, good evening. This is a subdivision variance request for 6336 Del Bello Spur. And this is for the road requirement for 1/2 of Del Bello Spur to be constructed to concrete curb and gutter. The Del Bello Spur as it currently exists as an asphalt service with a 60-foot right-of-way. The owner has prepared a minor plat that will be submitted soon once we get any headway with the ordinance. We've got over 11 acres of property, and it's zoned open single-family residential. The owners are making the request because they just like to build a single-family residence and a barn on the property. So staff is recommending approval of this variance request with the 2 conditions: that the subdivision variance would expire upon change of use from a single-family detached structure, or 2, the subdivision variance will expire when the property is replatted into 1 or more lots/reserves.
What, no PowerPoint? I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. We're on a roll. Okay. Consideration and possible action to appoint Nicole Tyson to the Events Task Force Board. Before we get started with that appointment and vote, I would like to, because we have a professional events person in our midst, I would like to make a stipulation. I know that the events board or the boards like to, and, ordinarily appoint their chairman. We've been in a lag position. We need some restructuring, and we need our resident professional to be at the helm. And that's my recommendation. I would like to put that forward with my motion to not only appoint Nicole Tyson, but to appoint her as the chairman for the Events Task Board.
Mayor, I'll second that motion. One point of clarification is this board is a 5-member board. Do we have a member that's no longer going to be serving, that Nicole will be able to fill that position?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I second your motion then.
All right, and I don't have clarification at this time about the remaining members. They've had, some problems just among their personal lives and whatnot. So what? You're busy. So we will get that straight, and I assume that now it's out of our hands and in Ms. Tyson's hands. So, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries 7-0. Keep up the good work. Okay. Congratulations. Okay. I knew that was coming. All right, number 5, discussion on charter amendment election as requested by Councilmember Hain. Councilmember Hain.
Thank you, Mayor. The reason why I had asked to put this on is because I know that we had 2 meetings to go through before we can just verify the language that's going to go in the ballot that the Charter Commission asked us to put on the ballot per their recommendation. And I just wanted some time, which I did clarify with Bobby a little bit about how structured that language can be to go to the ballot, like when we'd like for it to start, what we'd like for it to include. And I got advice that the best way to be transparent with the voters is to make it very simple and to not add too much language or too many caveats in it for it to go to the voters, so they'll know very well what they're voting on when they get there. Because one of the things I wanted to, just for transparency, I know it's really hard. A lot of us have been volunteers for many years, and it's really hard to, it was a hard thing, I believe, for some of us to take that recommendation from the Charter Committee and not, you just can't get out of it any other way when it comes to the taxpayer and stretching that dollar. But we have it both ways, that the taxpayer wants us to be here and do for them, and then the other taxpayer's like, no, spend all your time for free. It's hard. So one of the things I was asking is to move that date out a couple of years to let it be effective so that it gives us time to plan and let the public know that this is coming and that their taxpayers will be used to stipend these positions sometime in the future, maybe 1 or 2 years out. That was the only thing I was going to recommend. I think legally it would be effective if it passed or failed in May. Maybe move it out a year. That's all I was going to ask, nothing big.
So your request is not to put it on in May?
No, my request is to put it on in May, but to add the language of caveat instead of effective if it passes or fails. Let's say it passes, to start maybe the next cycle, not immediately. Does that make sense? Just to give some transparency to the voters that we are not the ones that are going to somewhat benefit, but it will be for future council. It was just a thought. I'd love to talk about it. Again, I would have liked to see it where none of us benefited from it, because then it's the future council. But I was advised that that's very complicated and not very transparent to the voter, because then the voter will say, what are you trying to hide? I don't want that. I want it to be very clear. Just a thought.
Okay.
That's all it is. So
Anyone else?
Thoughts? I
Yeah.
have them.
Good.
Yeah, so my thought on that is that was not what the commission recommended, that I voted for what the commission recommended, despite my not being in favor of this item at all, but that's the way they recommended it. I would prefer we leave it exactly as they recommended it. I don't want to mess with it. If they had wanted to wait a year or 5 years or 10 or not at all, I mean, they didn't give us that stipulation. I don't think we should meddle. My opinion.
Well, that was my position in terms of whether not for, never was for, but the fact is, we appointed this commission, we accepted their recommendation, and so I believe that although I see the value in what you're saying, I believe that we need to accept it as it is. Therefore, I am going to ask for a motion to approve.
Mayor, I think this is just a discussion tonight, that there's no action for us to take.
Oh, darn. Okay.
Close.
All right, I was all ready to put this one behind us,
thank
you
guys
know.
for letting me put that on and just
Sure.
trying to get some transparency and participation.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Question for Kyle, Bobby, or Tammy. When would we expect to see this come before us to actually take that vote to trigger everything to?
It wasn't on this evening is because I didn't get the contract from the county. It's still way early in the process, so not that the county's behind. She kind of went above and beyond to get it to me Friday. I just didn't have it to review it and have Bobby review it for tonight. So it'll be on your next agenda. The deadline is not till the middle of February to actually have to call the election, so you're still early.
And that's where I fell behind, so I apologize for that as well. All right. Thank you. Number 6, consideration and possible action to direct staff on the noise ordinance. Kyle?
This is actually something that the council asked to put on from the last meeting, was to talk about it. You had people that came up and talked about a request for the city to extend its nuisance and therefore its noise enforcement into the ETJ. There was a gentleman from Sedona Lakes that was asking about that, and I believe that there was one or two other people that he had referenced as well in Sedona Lakes. There was a gentleman from, I think he lived on Pine or at the end of Creek, and he asked if the city could do anything about the airplanes flying over and landing at Wolf Air Park. And then Mr. Johnson had asked the city to do something about the noise coming from Cameron. So this was something that the council asked to have put on the agenda to give direction to the staff about. So this is your item.
So here we are.
I mean, can we? I mean, can we extend, can we say, I guess, A, can we extend it? And B, are we precluded in this subdivision by an otherwise defined 380 agreement?
No, the city has the authority to do that. What you would do is you would extend your nuisance ordinance. It's not just the noise ordinance, which means junk vehicle, weedy lots, all of those things that are declared nuisances by the city would be extended into that. That's the caveat. Yes, you can. The chief actually had a conversation with the sheriff's department. He can actually tell you a little bit more about some of the noise enforcement that the sheriff's department.
Sheriff is here.
Yeah, and
We would go with that, but the sheriff, the police chief first.
Good evening, council. After this came up in the last council meeting, I contacted Captain Phillips with the Sheriff's Department and Deputy Chief Varian Snellgrove, and we talked about the noise ordinances in the ETJ or outside of the city limits, and basically just asked the question, do they respond and do they handle these types of complaints? Their response back to me was yes, they do. So I don't understand, what the complaints were, if they've called more than once, or if the Sheriff's Department wasn't doing anything, which I doubt. I believe the Sheriff's Department was doing something. But where this all transpired from, I really don't know. But I did speak with them about it. They did say that they do handle those complaints. They do take care of that when they're called out there. So that's basically at that point in time where we were at with it. So as far as I was under the impression is that, they did handle it. They did take care of it. There was really no need for us to extend our jurisdiction any further.
yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Because, Chief, my understanding is that if we extend it out by 5,000 feet, that's extending it out for the entire city limits, 5,000 feet. We can't just extend it out for Sedona Lakes.
Correct.
Then any noise nuisance call will be routed to RPD. And these individuals aren't taxpayers to the city. These are taxpayers to the county. So then we're being asked to take our police officers and sending them to handle these noise nuisances at no cost. Now, if that were to occur, is there the ability to establish almost like an agreement, maybe with the MUD or the HOA, to say we will get reimbursed for our cost if that happens?
My guess is if the council decides to extend the nuisance ordinance in the ETJ, there would be no obligation for the HOA or the MUD in order to reimburse us because it'd be a council decision to do that.
But is Councilman Davis accurate in that if we extend that it's our police department that's going to
Yes,
go into the
yes, we would be going out and doing that.
so the sheriff's office wouldn't be handling.
Not if you extended, not if you have the city police start enforcing our nuisance ordinance in the ETJ, then no, there wouldn't be they still could because it's still in the county. But I would think, just like Councilmember Davis said, the call probably would come first to the city.
Because I'm sympathetic to what they're experiencing.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to have noisy neighbors that are partying into the wee hours of the morning, but at the same time, we have to take into consider the ramifications. Now, in this instance as well, is there the opportunity where Sedona Lakes could come to us and say maybe for faster response times, we want to develop some sort of agreement with the city to help enforce maybe county regulations, depending upon what's on the books. I'm not sure if it's can work that way.
I don't know that it would be a relationship between the development and the city. It would be between the city and the sheriff's department, or the sheriff and the county.
Okay.
If for some reason we were going to be doing that.
We already work under a mutual aid agreement that if they need our assistance, we respond to help if it's outside our city, and they in turn respond and help us if we need their help if it's in the city. If we talk about extending this 5,000 feet, we're talking about Sedona, Pomona, South Fork, Silver Creek, then all the way to the east and all the way to the west, and all these areas in 2014 who specifically came up here and said they did not want the Manvel Police Department responding out there. They like the Sheriff's Department. They don't want us. So if we talk about that, then we're gonna be extending it not only to these subdivisions, but outside, all the way up to Bailey Road in the areas that did not want us. So I got a little heartburn with that, but that's just me personally. I don't have the manpower, the resources to respond to all these subdivisions during the 4th of July, during New Year's Eve. I get calls all the time that the dump trucks are waking people, the trash trucks are waking people up at the Pomona Elementary School at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we don't have the personnel to respond to all these large subdivisions that are coming in that are in ETJ. The Sheriff's Department is, if the sheriff wants to talk about it, they're in the same boat we are. They are shorthanded on the north end where they have most of their call load, and they really struggle at responding to these calls as well. We can try to get to them and help out, but I don't think my personal opinion, it is a good idea to extend our resources outside into our ETJ.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with you, Chief, but I'm glad to hear that the county is on top of things and able to step in, and that we do have that aid agreement so that we can work together, especially if items come up. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, and I think with the chief's recommendation and with the chief having talked to the sheriff and the sheriff saying that they're handling it, I go back to my grandma, and she says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think we are in a good position. I think we have a heightened awareness, which is helpful, and on both ends. But I think that for us to extend is fool's play. I do. My opinion. Anybody else?
Invite them to be annexed, and we're happy to service them.
Actually, most of them have strategic partnership agreements, so they will eventually be inside the city limits unless the state changes the annexation or the SBA law sometime in the future.
All right, so we have no action to be taken.
No, and not about extending the noise ordinance or the nuisance ordinance into the ETJ. Don't see
Okay.
anything with that.
We do have our special guests here. Was there anything you wanted to add, Sheriff, or Commissioner? All right. Thank you.
I guess I just want to echo the same thing, is if the sheriff feels like he needs us to do something, then by all means, come and talk to us, and we'll do what we can on this side if it's a tool you need in your toolbox.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Are you on?
That addresses the concerns of that, but what about the other two that he had mentioned with Cameron's and the airport? Because those are within city limits, right?
Obviously, the FAA regulates airplanes. I know the gentleman
Can't
had come
rule
up
them
and
in.
made the comments about the airplanes making unusually loud noises as they're trying to land or take off, something like that, but obviously the city has no jurisdiction over that. It would be the FAA that he'd have to ask for some sort of relief from, because the city's not going to, doesn't have any authority to regulate anything like that. As for Camerons, we were looking back over the noise regulations ordinance. It looks like it was last updated in 2012, and it makes no distinction between different land uses in the city limits. It's a flat, citywide noise ordinance. And a suggestion might be is to look at revisions to it that would look at different land uses, because as you would no doubt guess, the noise that comes from a single-family residence on an open single-family piece of property is different than a heavy industrial piece of property. And perhaps the noise restrictions that the city places should be based on the land uses, where you shouldn't probably have a standard set amount citywide if you have something that is industrial or heavy commercial versus something that's light commercial, or even at some point in the future, if we have industrial or other types of land uses or different zonings, it's going to be different than somebody that lives in a house. And that could be something that, if you'd like us to look at, we can look at some other cities' noise ordinance that might have a distinction based on land uses, as opposed to just a flat amount.
Lorraine?
I have a comment. I do hear a lot of wisdom in what you're saying concerning that recently in this year, we have done some zoning in some places that weren't planned on our, the comprehensive plan. So that kind of rings to me as we've done some different zoning. I guess my fear is, and I think there is wisdom in that, let's maybe workshopping that noise ordinance to really look it over to see if we need to tighten it up in different areas, because we're zoning in different places for different businesses that are coming in. My fear is well, I wouldn't say a fear. I think it's going to get complicated for businesses that have been here and people moving in and out, and how we're going to be able to keep moving forward with businesses that were already here and then come in and actually apply ordinances after the fact. Don't we have a lot of problem with that, like grandfathering, if you will?
Well, again, if there was a land use in place prior to zoning, which is what Cameron's was, it can continue its land use as a legal non-conforming.
Okay.
It can continue a legal non-conforming, whether it rezones the back part of its property that was zoned residential or not. The tract itself was being used as a recycling place before zoning was instituted. So it can continue to use itself or use that area as a legal non-conforming use for as long as it wants to.
So how would a noise, redoing of the noise ordinance help that situation?
Well, again, the city's going to be looking at the areas that were zoned because of the land use at the time. Cameras is a prime example. If you're looking at areas of the city that will eventually be converted from a open single family to a heavy commercial in an area, that's going to be because the city decides to do that. There's the area that's down towards the eastern part of town that is the chemical plant. There's areas that are behind it that are zoned open single-family residential because their houses are there. If there are other places that the city decides development is right and the land use changes, say on the north side of Highway 6, that's currently open single-family, there's nothing there. And if there was a large plant that came in, bought the property on the north side of Highway 6, came to the council and convinced the council to rezone it from open single-family to heavy commercial, that would be a decision of the council making. The one-off sort of zonings that were done because there was a business in place is just that. There was a business that was there. If you're looking at a different place in the future, it's going to happen because the council decides to do that. A developer comes in and asks the council to change the zoning. Then, of course, you're going to be looking at if you change the requirements for noise or anything else. If there's a requirement for an SUP, you have some flexibility into different requirements. If it's a permitted use, like we've talked about before, it's a permitted use. You use the noise ordinance to regulate that. If you do it based on land use, then you're talking about looking at different areas that you will have changed the zoning of in the future, not something that was in existence prior to zoning.
Because I can think of two things of where this might apply. The little church that's turning into a little event venue, and the heavy commercial that we just did way out off of 1128 and Bailey. And to revamp this might help protect those areas as it gets busy, to tie these types of things to land use. I'm just wondering, kind of with Nicole, how this would help Camerons and their surrounding.
Well, another prime example, if you think about it over on Bissell, you have Gates Machine Shop. It's a heavy commercially zoned piece of property surrounded by open single-family residential. It's exactly the same thing. They may not make as much noise, and I think most of the work that they do is inside, but it's the same idea. You have a heavy commercially zoned piece of property literally across the property line from open single-family residential because that business was there prior to zoning. That's why it was zoned heavy commercial. There are only a few of those that were like that. It's the ones that will come in the future because the city council at that time decides to change the zoning from open single family or light commercial or whatever it is to something else that would then bring in perhaps a higher noise level.
So going over this noise ordinance and just redoing it or looking at it or analyzing it, do you think this will bring relief to the area around Cameron if we were just to look at it and reevaluate it and tie it to a land use? Some kind of relief, I'm just asking.
Truthfully, probably not, because you have a land use that makes a lot of noise. And the surrounding property owners literally are on the other side of a property line from a heavy industrial use of a recycling center. So I don't know that changing the ordinance is going to affect or make it better for the people that live next to a recycling center like that.
So if we
They're
did
going to make
this-
noise.
So if we did this, it would be for future planning.
It would be for those areas that you probably want to change the zoning for in the future.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Kyle, I would be supportive of looking to update the noise ordinance in regards to specifically preparing for the future. One of the things that, I don't know if this is possible or not, that would be interesting to consider specifically with the situation that's arisen between Cameron and the neighbors is looking to get, similar to what we might do with a traffic study and a traffic count, get a sample size of the noise that is produced from a heavy commercial facility. And to look at that, possibly cross-analyze it with the data that's produced that Mr. Johnson has, that he could provide us through what he's collected, to actually see what the impact is. Because if we're gonna look to adjust the noise ordinance for the different land uses, looking at what other cities have done to see how they've set it based off of the applicable use is gonna be important. But that might also give us some insight in regards to getting that steady stream of noise. What hours are usually the peak hours for noise? And just like we have it with construction, that you can't do the heavy equipment during certain hours on the weekend. I would be interested in seeing that built into the ordinance if possible. I think also at some point here, we just need to have an agenda item to address the situation that Mr. Johnson brought up. That way we can just put a nail in it for Mr. Johnson, for Mr. Black, with Cameron, for City Council. That way it's just, we lay everything out there, we make the decisions that we need to make, we enforce what we need to enforce, and that way everybody has a path forward. But we can't talk about that tonight, it's not an agenda item. But I would be supportive of the idea that you presented, workshopping that and seeing what staff would recommend there. Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody else? Jessica?
I just want to make one other comment with that and try to get some feedback from council regarding a noise ordinance. There are other ways, land use wise, that if you're not presented with this situation with something that's existing and then things grow up around it. Buffering is a really good way between land uses that you can mitigate some of this, even if it's just like a CVS that's next door to a house where you have certain landscaping requirements, whether that be the actual width of a green space with plantings, with shrubbery and trees and fencing that's there to visually screen, but then also to try to mitigate some of that noise. That's why sometimes whenever we get SUPs in here, staff will make certain recommendations like that. Also for lighting too, which I know has sort of been brought up, where you don't want to be a commercial property, even though, you know, maybe it's a doctor's office, and be a burden on that single family residence if it's next door. So if y'all are okay with us exploring that too, and maybe possibly bringing that to you for any future land uses, I'd be happy to do that.
I think buffering is a great recommendation. I know that you know, when 610 went through the middle of Bel Air, they actually were some of the first people to use the foliage and to plant, and now it's quite lovely and it does do the job the research is in. So there might be something with that, but I do agree. I think, Mr. Johnson, we cannot talk about this tonight, but I will be in contact with you. I think that going forward, we need to have an open discussion, as Councilman Davis said, and just not necessarily put it to bed because it didn't go in there, but to try and look at everything and to try and at this point involve the council and see if there's anything else that can be done, and to show that, you know, the interest is there to try and mitigate some of this. I don't know if it can happen, but we can certainly take a look at it. All right? Anybody else? Okay, any council comments?
I'll make consent agenda.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
All those in favor? I knew it. I couldn't get through it. Here I am. All right, council comments. Anybody? All right, we tore out of here before Christmas, and our meeting was so early in the month that I think I just didn't think about the fact that it was the last time we were going to be together. I wanted to be sure and thank the staff for all of their work last year, and I won't go ahead and wish you a Merry Christmas at this point, but I do want to thank Tammy and Alyssa for our lovely dinner and taking care of us to be festive, and even though we didn't have anything to say about it afterwards, it was just a little too early. And to wish Happy New Year to everyone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? That's a wrap. I know, almost got there, didn't I?